Hello, wonderful people. I'm Dane Peterson from Wonderbot Animals. And here is... A missing cat that vanished for 6 years returns home after owner spots him in an unusual place. Before we begin, make sure to smash the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. From America's New Hampshire to South East England's Hampshire, people and pets are reuniting. A family has had an emotional reunion with their cat 6 years after it left the house. Joe and Ade Haigh from Stubbington, Hampshire, got Charlie when he was just 7 weeks old. He was the sweetest little black and white kitten with glowing green eyes, and the English couple was happy to welcome him to his forever home. Charlie lived a happy life with his new parents in the suburban village of Stubbington, which he loved adventuring through. They trusted Charlie enough to let him walk around the south coast of England, confident he'd always make it home safely. This went on for 9 years, so imagine the Hayes' shock when, one day, Charlie never came back home to his family. They did their best to avoid panicking, as that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, they made it their mission to find their fur baby. The anguished couple put up lost cat posters around the neighborhood and desperately contacted local veterinarian offices and animal shelters in hopes that someone brought Charlie in. Alas, this was all to no avail. Sadly, life had to go on. Joe and Ade couldn't grieve forever. The couple wound up packing up and moving to a neighborhood over 2 miles from the house that they once owned and raised Charlie in. The couple hadn't visited their previous charming village in quite a while, but Joe stopped by the town they once called home when her mother was looking to purchase a property in that region. Anything for Mom. My mom, sister, and I were looking at a place close to the house Ade and I lived in when Charlie went missing, said Joe. Being back in their old stomping grounds brought back memories of Charlie. If it wasn't for the bungalow my mom, sister, and I were looking at, we wouldn't have been around there, she continued. Perhaps there was more than one reason Joe was brought back to the area. It originally seemed like just an uneventful trip back to her old neighborhood when suddenly Joe spotted an oddly familiar-looking black and white cat outside a house. It looked like a replica of Charlie. When we saw this cat on a wall outside a house, I was immediately 99.9% sure it was Charlie, Joe recalled, but since she hadn't seen her precious furball in about 6 years, it would be a miracle if it were really him. He was a lot skinnier, but came straight over to me and responded to his name, Joe explained. But of course, the cat could have just been responding to sound. She needed to know for sure. Joe had a strong gut feeling that this random cat in her former neighborhood was in fact her missing pet, so she did what any crazy cat lady would do. She took him. Joe immediately booked it to the animal shelter she worked at as a receptionist to check the wandering mystery cat for a microchip, as her and her engineer husband had once implanted in Charlie. The microchip test would reveal the truth. Unbelievably, the microchip test revealed that this enigma of a cat truly was Charlie, who was 16 years old as of 2012. I'm over the moon to have him back. We shed a few tears when the microchip test worked, Joe gushed. It was fate. Joe went and spoke to the man who lived in the house she found Charlie in front of, where she learned that he'd been feeding Charlie for nearly 2.5 years. If only Charlie could talk to tell the tales of his 6-year journey. Charlie had always been quite a friendly cat. When we lived in Stubbington, he would often go down to the nearby stables where they would feed him. So it's no surprise he found someone to look after him in the intervening years, Joe explained. Joe and Ade were beyond grateful to have their 4-legged friend back in their home. But things were much different in the Haigh household since Charlie had last lived with them, as the family now had 2 other cats, 2 dogs, and beautiful twin babies, Drew and Daniela. Though he was always a mischievous, fun-loving outdoor kitty, Joe and Ade were understandably wary of the idea of letting him outside again. Regarding the idea, Joe then stated, "We will eventually, but I don't know when I'll be brave enough. He's got the meow of an older cat now, and you can tell he's grown up into an older boy. He's settling back in and doesn't seem too fazed by the children," Joe relayed of Charlie's progress. The Hayes had always wondered what happened to Charlie after he disappeared, but that no longer mattered. Charlie was finally home. Though the story of Joe and Ade's runaway cat is miraculous, cats are survivors, and this kind of thing happens more than you'd think. Though not all pet owners get microchips implanted in their cats, there are other ways of confirming that a lost cat is your lost cat. John Gulo was craving both responsibility and love one day in 2012, so he followed in the footsteps of so many young adults before him and went searching for the perfect pet. When he saw 2 cats, Julie and her brother, Jack, John knew he'd found the perfect pair. He brought the two home and let them run hog wild around his place. The kittens cuddled together. They played together. They were a delight. This made it particularly painful when, shortly after the adoption, John had to leave Julie and Jack with his mother. He was off to college and wasn't into the idea of hiding cats in his dorm room. John's mother, Lorinda, welcomed the kittens into her abode because, come on, who wouldn't? Julie had a little white spot on her fur that made her just so darn cute, but her joy in living with the two kittens was unexpectedly cut short. Being that she was a cat and prone to bizarre fits of panic, Julie took off running one day, just scooted out the door and headed down the street. I couldn't find her, Lorinda recalled. I was just beside myself. Devastated by the breakup of his dynamic kitten duo, John teamed up with his mom to find the missing feline. They wandered the neighborhood, hanging up posters, jingling bags of cat treats, and calling Julie. Frantic searches for the cat halted, however, when doctors diagnosed John with lymphoma. With a fight for his life now ahead of him, he could no longer focus on the cat he so dearly loved. 6 years passed. John beat cancer, married his longtime girlfriend, found a new job, and set up shop in Indianapolis, 25 miles away from his old home in Carmel. Things were looking up, but he never stopped thinking about Julie. Perhaps it was for that reason his mother was browsing Paw Boost Lost and Found Pets, a page on Facebook dedicated to reuniting pet owners with, well, their lost pets. A certain post on it piqued her interest. A woman named Christine McKeon wrote that she'd recently seen a cat under a shed in her backyard. The cat, she noted, was skittish and just a little bit mean. It didn't sound anything like Julie. Most concerning of all was that the post didn't mention the white spot on Julie's belly, which would have been a good detail to include, Lorinda thought, were someone trying to find this cat's owner. Still, even after 6 years, she, like John, was drawn to the idea that Julie was definitely still out there looking for them. She knew they'd be kicking themselves for the rest of their lives if they didn't follow up with Christine. So John made the drive, white-knuckle clenching the steering wheel in anticipation. In less than half an hour, he arrived at Christine's house and stood before the shed, a mean, stray black cat called home. With every ounce of love he could muster, just as he and his mother had done 6 years before in the streets of suburbia, John called Julie's name, and nothing happened. But understanding that cats are cats and don't really come when you call them, John gave it another go. "Julie," he called, "Julie." Then, 2 glowing eyes peeked out at John from the darkness beneath the shed. John in her sights, the cat once called mean and skittish emerged. She came out running from under the shed, Christine recalled, like, "Oh hey, I know this guy." Soon she was face to face with John. And then she started purring like a lawnmower engine. She rubbed against John's legs and, after he bent down to pick her up, she crawled right up onto his shoulders. Still, John needed to be convinced that this was Julie. I turned her around and I said, "Does she have a white spot?" John explained. The folks gathered around confirmed. "She has a white spot on her stomach." John couldn't believe it. After 6 years, he finally found his cat. In that moment of reunion, John pet Julie and noticed her fur was surprisingly well kept. To him, it meant that she only recently moved in under the shed. Someone had been taking care of her over the years. Delighted to have his cat back, John looked forward to another reunion, Julie and Jack's. Would the siblings even remember the short time they spent together? Would they get along? All of John's anxieties melted away, however, when he put Julie down beside Jack for the first time. The two went right back to their old tricks, running around and playing together. John was overwhelmed. "It's almost like seeing a ghost or something," he said of seeing Julie in his home. Still, this was one ghost John was happy to have haunt his house. John couldn't help but be thankful to whoever cared for Julie over those 6 years. There wasn't a chance in the world she would have made it on her own over that time. Oddly, though, some animals do prove surprisingly self-sufficient on their own.